I've gone ahead and pre-constructed one of the air intakes and chest pieces, and it fits like so, and lines up with this part of the wooden frame. I made a mistake in my measurements, so I just went ahead and shaved that off a little. As long as it fits nice and snug. And afterwards we will be gluing all of that together. There's a couple things that are iconic that I feel absolutely need to be done if you want it to look like the character. The first is the air intakes, very reminiscent of an F-15 fighter jet, which is what the original character was based on. When he's a robot, you also have the chest here with a slope. This is where the fan of the air intakes is when he's in robot mode. So those are definitely the most this general shape. In terms of measurements, there is some flexibility there. You can wing it. Now if I knew where my ruler was, oh, here we go. I like nice round measurements, so that one's 2.5. That one is just under 2. This one I estimate, and this one is 2. And the width overall is 2.25. I did that so that I have a 2-inch hole here. Later on in the tutorial, you'll see why it's very important to have at least a 2-inch square cut out here, which is bordered by some framework. If we look from this angle, you'll see this is all hollow. This is in fact where the children's hands will go, their little pockets, and that's where their hands will go when they're in jet mode. And later on we'll have some more cardboard here to cover up their bodies when they are in airplane mode. The other most important measurement in all of this to keep in mind is the distance from here to here. When your child is transformed into an airplane, this part will be touching the ground while their hands are inside. So the best way to determine how big this overall piece is, what I would do is just make one rectangle, cut a rectangle this long and this tall. The length is determined by the fold of the wings, and the height is determined by the size of your child when they are in the crouched position. Now for this one, we start off with a rectangle, and the length, it's going to be the same length as this. And for the height, again, we've already discussed that's going to be up to here, more or less, which is where the costume touches the floor while your child is in vehicle mode. So I can't give you the exact measurement because it will be different in all cases. Let's assume for the moment, though, that your child is the same size as mine. So if we go from here, that is 8 inches. So 8 inches, I take half of that, 4. 4 is going to be the size of the height of the air intake. So it's basically divided in half. So you've got this part and this part. So half of the length is the air intake, the other half is for the rest of his chest. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and glue these pieces together. One of the reasons, whoops. Come on. One of the reasons I like to use the double corrugated cardboard is especially when you're gluing two pieces together like this, edge on, it actually gives you a substantial edge to adhere to. Let's make sure I get this right. Okay. Try to line it up as best you can, but in the end we're gonna sand that edge smooth anyways and cover it up. Alright, next piece I've got is here. Most important part for this piece is to have it as flush as possible. I already marked the lines of more or less where it's going to go. Alright. And then we've got one more triangle piece. Should be the same size, and we'll go ahead and glue that. You may have noticed that there's a little bit sticking out here. That's okay. We're gonna just cut that off once everything is nice and dry. Always better to have a little too much than too little. We'll start cutting this just a little bit, and we can get figure out where the line is, which is right here. And we will take our ruler and just mark that. We do want to make a diagonal cut to match this line here. And we'll be using this line as a guide. Now I've gone ahead and I've cut a piece. This is actually a thinner cardboard, a single layer. I use this for some of the smaller parts that don't really have anything to do with the structure. And I've marked off the lines. So you've got one section, two section, and a third section. The measurements will depend on your own personal project. Once we have the lines, though, what I like to do is one of these, what do you call them, spatulas, when you're doing plastering. I've marked out the lines, and I just push down really hard. When you're cutting these kind of pieces, it's always good to line up make sure that the corrugated part lines up with where you actually want to do the folds. And then we will do another one here. Push down really hard. So we've got our basic fold. I've also gone ahead and cut out, I'm pretty sure it's 2 inches. Yeah, 2 inch by 2 inch square. So we can go ahead and pop that out. And we will be gluing that on like so. Now the reason I have a hole here to begin with is I like texture. I find, you know, even though paint is great, there's only so much that you can do with paint, and texture is very important. And this is going to go on the inside. If it's a little bit too big, no problem. Just cut it down this way. Alright, and what that does, it gives us a recess with a little bit of texture So you've got a housing, and inside is where the air intake fan is going to be. It's these kind of little details that I don't think you can do quite as well with only paint, and it will make a big difference with the final copy. Now the color of the cardboard doesn't matter. It just so happened that I had some single corrugated cardboard that happened to be white on one side. It does help with the tutorial to help you guys see what we're doing, but in the end it makes no difference at all because everything is going to be painted anyways. And if we have a little bit sticking out, we just take our X-Acto knife. I hope you guys can see this. Rest it against here. That's going to determine the flatness, and just cut off whatever extra happens to be there. Again, little sanding and smoothing, and you'll get yourself a nice clean edge. Same thing goes with this side. There's a little bit extra, so we'll just go ahead and cut that out. And there we go. When your kids are putting their hands inside to hide, this corner here might be a bit of a problem. We don't want a corner digging into their wrists, so you can also go ahead and line it up with the way that you think they're parallel to this, and just go ahead and cut out that extra bit. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and glue it. When you are gluing on these pieces, guys, if you choose to do it the same way, where you build it first and then piece it on later, keep in mind, very important, make sure that they are not crooked, either pointing inwards or outwards. Inwards is actually the bigger problem because you're going to have a moving nose in here, and if it's pointing inwards, it might get in the way of the nose. Make sure from end to end that this is also the same. 8 inches, 8 inches, 8 inches. The reason is because this is a bit of a complicated piece. We're going to be gluing it from here and here at the same time. So really, there are no second chances. Make sure you do it right the first time. One other thing is you'll notice the screws here. They do stick up a little bit still. So if you want to make absolutely sure that everything fits properly and glues properly, what I do is I put it all the way, and then I just push down really hard to get an idea of where exactly those screws are. Which is right here and here. And I actually use my little Dremel motor tool to take out a little bit, at least maybe the first layer of the cardboard. You do not want to go all the way through. And that just helps to make sure that everything fits nice and flush when you're putting it in. Okay, so I've gone ahead and taken off the part for the wings because we don't need them, and they're frankly going to get in the way. I also removed the shoulder harnesses. So the final bit of construction that we need to do, we need to sand smooth all of the edges, especially these kind of guys here. Make sure you get everywhere. We want to get rid of all the fuzzy stuff that we can. Here it's a little bit pointy, so what you can do, even with a regular pair of scissors, just cut off the corner on both sides. Your kids will appreciate that you for it. If you don't have a Dremel, get one. These are awesome. The next step is to do some caulking, silicone caulking gun. This will do a couple of things. It's gonna cover up all these holes. It's also gonna make your costume a whole lot stronger. The edges are not going to fray. If you do get caught in the rain a little bit, there's a chance that your costume will survive. My costumes have lasted over a year, so they've taken a lot of wear and tear. We've gone to a lot of different shows. What you'll need is caulking, some water, and a lot of paper towels. You just choose somewhere where you would like to start. So we can go here. Oopsie. And what you want to do is just kind of push it in from the edges. Make sure it gets inside of the holes. Now the rules with this are the same as the rules with the glue gun. Try not to use too much. This stuff does not sand very well, and it's going to be really hard to clean up the smudges afterwards. The water is to keep your fingers clean, and also to help with the cleanup. You don't want soaking wet, but even just a little bit wet, it will just really help smooth all of that stuff out. Even though it looks ugly now, it's a smooth surface, and it will look fantastic once you have done your paint. And we just keep going around and around all the places. I don't know if I've mentioned it, but another reason I like using this stuff, I mean, it has pros and cons. Some of the cons, it's very hard to sand. It's not sandable, so if you make a mess of it, clean it up right away, or you'll regret it. One of the other another con, it's very dense. It's heavy. So I'm always mindful of when I'm using this stuff, because especially when it's a kid's costume, you really don't want it to be so heavy to the point where it's uncomfortable for them to wear. One of the other pros, what I really like about it, it's super tough and it's flexible. It doesn't crack. So even your kids will have accidents and bumps and unexpected things. This stuff, once it dries, it will just bounce back to whatever original shape that it dried to. This will probably dry overnight. We're going to get started on the air intake, the exhausts, the engine exhausts. We're going to measure the halfway point. So in my case, it's 10.5 inches, so the halfway point will be 5.25 inches. So to figure out how big your exhausts are going to be, we take the full measurement here, which is 10.5 inches. In my case, will be different than yours. Half of that is 5.25. So 5.25 inches times pi, for those of you that remember high school math, so it's 3.1416 blah 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 blah, gives you a circumference of 16.49 inches. Now it's important that we use whole numbers here, so it can be 16 or it can be 17, but it can't be 16.5. And as we start building, you will realize why. It's also important to know it's better to go smaller, not bigger, because if you go bigger, it just won't fit, most likely. So in our case, 16.5, we're going to choose 16. So we take 16 inches circumference, divide by 3.14. That gives us our diameter, and then we divide by 2, which gives us our radius, 2.54. So just a tiny bit more than 2.5 inches. So on a plain piece of cardboard, you've got your compass set, and just go a tiny bit more than 2.5. Once you get that, you cut it out, and then we double check by using our measuring tape, and here we go. We have 16 inches. Now in your case it might be different, it might be 17 if it's bigger. If it's for a smaller child it might be 15, but 16 is what we want. So we cut out 2 pieces like that with a circumference of 16 inches. We also take 2 pieces here. In this case I made it 3 inches wide, 16 inches long. This is why we need round numbers for the air intakes. In this case it's 16 inches, and the reason I did that is because we have 16 equal sections, 1-inch sections, so we space it out 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inches, 4 inches, onwards all the way up to 16. And then on the top we are going to alternate, so we start with a 1/4 inch here, and every section that has 1 inch at the bottom is a 1/2 inch at the top, so it tapers. This is what you want to end up with afterwards. Okay, so we got 2 of those. Try and follow the corrugated pattern here. The reason is we are going to be bending these guys. Alright, so you can do that just with your thumbs and your fingers. Much easier to bend the cardboard along the corrugation side here. So in the end, that's what we kind of end up with. And what's going to happen, we are going to attach that. We're going to glue it. Okay, now depending on which way you curve it, I drew another line down the middle, so that's just halfway. And you guys are going to want to push down with your spatula tool along the line. If this seems a little bit tedious to you, if you guys have any better ideas or alternatives, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, while you're doing this, just remind yourself how much you love your children and what you're willing to do for them, and hopefully that will make the job go a little bit better. Kind of gives you an idea of what we're trying to do here. Now we have to glue them, so I go around the edge. So we're going to glue around the edge here. We just do a little bit at a time. Now that we've got our exhaust circle glued, we want to bend all these pieces in. I'm pushing all of them down just so that we get a better idea of how they are centered. I might want to put just a little bit more glue, but yeah, the first one's the hardest. Now we'll do the next one. So we've finished our engine exhausts. They look like so. I find that the slope here is just a little bit too steep. Would have been nicer if it came out a little bit further, so that's something that you guys might want to keep in mind when making yours. Also, going from 1 inch to 1/2 inch also sharpens the slope quite a bit. So maybe if you went from 1 inch to say 3/4 inch, you'll end up with a larger nozzle and it will come out a little bit more. So I mean, these are still perfectly fine. We're definitely going to use them, but when making yours, these are the types of adjustments that you might want to consider. We've gone ahead and siliconed around the edges here. That's the most important. Once it dries tomorrow, we can sand it a little bit, but it's mainly put in there for strength so that the edges of the cardboard don't fray, and it's flexible. That's about good for me, so that it is hanging lower than it is higher. You will have a bit of a slope, so how high or low you want these to sit will determine how much of your child's body it will hide. But the lower you go, the steeper the slope will be. I'm actually quite happy with just a 1-inch drop. So that would be approximately half the inch of the foam and then another half inch there. So if I eyeball it, that gives me about there. And then you would just mark it along the back wherever you want. So we've gone ahead and taken off the tailpiece from the frame, and you're just going to try and line them up as much in the middle. So you can see the circles sit a little bit lower than the center. This is actually the center line. Once you are happy with the alignment, you can take one and just mark 2 little lines here to help you remember, and then we glue. And as soon as the glue is dry, we are going to get started on the tail and the wings. So I've gone ahead and cut out some pieces for the tail. I don't really have any magic formula in terms of size, even if you have a toy on hand. But really, you're just going to kind of have to wing it yourself depending on the angles and the sizes. I've cut out a little notch, and it's going to fit together like so. So that's going to be the side of the plane. This is, let's see, about 3 inches down. The reason I notched and let it fit like this is it will be glued from here and from here. Hopefully adding a little bit more strength rather than just gluing it straight edge on. Make sure the corrugation goes this way because most of the flex that this wing is going to be experiencing is that way. And what I do, I'll just take something square to make sure that I've got a nice right angle. So I've gone ahead and marked more or less where I want to glue that. Most importantly, you want it to line up here. So our tail end is starting to take shape. Oh, before we actually put the tailpiece onto here, what I've done is I've drawn a line. You can estimate, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we want to start curling in this corner. It's easier to curl now than trying to do it later. But we're going to end up with something a little bit like this. Okay, so we have most of the tail assembled here. Now I'll draw your attention to these areas here, and what I wanted to show you is why we curve it, and basically we're just going to glue that here. Okay, so now we've got those curved pieces glued into place and kind of help blending into the engine. You don't want to go too far down because there will be a child's body in here, so it's not to create an illusion from underneath but more from sideways, and then a little bit of filler will cover all that up. Nobody's gonna see deep down inside. like that anyways. So the last step, or the second last step, we've got these really sharp corners, so we just want to round them off a little bit, and I find doing it with scissors is just fine. You don't want to take off too much, just take away some of the sharpness. We still have to do the final step, which is to silicone seal all of the edges. Okay, so now that we've got the tail done, I just attached it, and we can get started on doing the big wings. Now, to do the wings, this would be a good time for you to either have a picture of an airplane or just the toy. And I have over here a scrap piece of cardboard, and I just kind of eyeballed it. What we want is for this edge to fit all the way snugly against the hinge, and you might have to do a couple rough drafts before you get it right. There really is no right way or wrong way to do this. You just have to kind of, let's see the camera angle. Okay, just kind of try and think of what shape most accurately represents the jet. I like the wing to start right about where the shoulders end. So you see we have to cut out a little bit here to accommodate the air intakes slash shoulder pieces. And then you might have to experiment a couple times to get the angle right. This is a little bit shorter than this, sticking out. A couple things that you do want to pay attention to is this part here. Okay, that for me is very iconic of the Starscream. So you've got these lines here, a little bit of an angle, but it comes in, it's not straight. There is like an angle like that. Again, refer to pictures of Starscream as a robot or as the jet in real life, but this is basically the piece that you end up with. And once we have that, once we're happy with the shape that we want, we are going to put it down on a piece of cardboard. Again, remember the corrugation runs this way, so the cardboard is very weak this way, very strong this way. And we'll go ahead and trace it out, which I've already done 2 pieces, and then we are going to cut it out. So I'll go ahead and take this piece, and I drew a line where you have the angle meeting, and we'll just push down and fold. And again, this just makes sure that you get the fold happening exactly where you want it to. And again, much easier to follow the corrugation, do the fold along the corrugation. So first I'm going to glue this part here. Okay, now you can fold this part for now, and that will ensure that everything is perfectly square. And as always, wipe off the excess, make sure everything is lined up nicely. So as you can see on the frame here, it's a little bit wider than it is here, so the side panel will be a little bit tapered. Here we have a straight line, and then here will be the taper. So I've gone ahead and marked more or less where I'm going to glue that. So we can go ahead and glue that now too. and we end up with a piece that looks something like this. So this is the wing, this is the side body of the jet, and we're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. So now that we got both of our wing pieces done, we're going to go ahead and clean up the edges a little bit, and go ahead and silicone everything. So if you see any really rough spots, you can sand that, round off any corners. Don't sand too much now. You can sand the edges after the silicone is done. You could do this now or later, because there's a chance that this might not be enough. You might need to do a little bit more. So I'll leave that up to you. Okay, so we are going to continue, and now we're going to make the back piece, part of the fuselage, I think is what you call it. So to do that, we are going to measure from the end here till about, usually I do about 2.5 to 3 inches. The exact measurement is not that important, but you want to go approximately halfway of whatever it is that your measurements are going to be. So in this case, for me, it's 6 inches, so I'm going to go about 2.5 actually. So that's almost half. And what we want to do is make a piece that will go here. So how do we do that? Well, I measure my pieces, and this is why I like round numbers. So here, in my case, I have 2 inches by 4.5 inches, and another 2 inches. And lengthwise, I have, for me, in my case, it's going to be 16.5. But again, for you guys, it's going to be different depending on your dimensions. So what I do is I try and replicate that part. So I have 4.5 in the middle, 2 on each side, and then I want a little bit of overhang, or flap, whatever you want to call it, on each side. So I take my piece, and using my trusty spackler thingy, I'm going to go along the lines and push down, and that's just going to help me fold the cardboard at exactly the point that I want it to be folded. And then I'm going to go like this, and then I'm going to go like this. Now we flip it over, and you see those 1-inch flanges. I also drew lines there, so I'm going to go ahead and trace along those lines, so we end up with something that looks like this. Okay, so before we put in the back, there's one final thing that we need to do in preparation for the transformation mechanics, so to speak. And if you take a look right here, I drilled a hole approximately right in the middle, both sides. And what we are going to do I use Lego pieces. I don't know if you can see those, but they're part of the gears. They have a groove in the middle, which I will be using to help align the fishing wire or fishing line. If you guys didn't know already, that's the magic behind the transformation. It's fishing line. So what we'll do, I've got a small screw, and we are going to screw that in place. Now, this one will actually be carrying a little bit of a load. Not too much of a load, but a load nonetheless. So I like to do that with screws. And we're going to put one right above. That one is kept mostly for alignment, so I don't bother with screws. I'm just going to glue it into place. And you want to make sure that it's pushed up nice and snug against the other one. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. So I've gone ahead and cut out the piece where in my situation was 4.5, 2, 2, 1, and 1. You might notice that I cut out little notches here and I cut out a little notch there. And what that is for, we bend the pieces and put it inside. So this piece is just short enough or long enough to fit inside of the hole created here. I don't know if any of you remember, but earlier on in the tutorial I said this is a weak spot because it's only glued end on end. After you put the cardboard will support it from underneath, and it's not going to be a weak spot anymore. But that's essentially what we're looking for. So this part sticks up about between 2 and 3 inches. There is no perfect size. Don't worry about it. You'll see once we start making the cockpit, it's not really that big of a deal. So and also the notches that we cut out, I did that just so that we always have access to the nuts, just in case if there's ever some kind of maintenance or adjustments that needed to be done. I like to keep those parts open. So we just push everything in nice and tight, fold these flaps down, and then we are going to glue inside of here. We are going to glue here. We are going to glue here. And that will give us the back. Oh, if I haven't mentioned it already, this is just single corrugated cardboard, very thin stuff. You don't have to worry about it using the thick stuff. This stuff is much easier to bend, and it's going to be connected literally everywhere around the corner. So that's definitely strong enough. Now that we have an actual structure, much earlier on I marked out here we had popsicle sticks. So we're going to go ahead and cut out this section so that the kids have maximum space available for their back and their bum. So I get my trusty Dremel tool